We've got a massive video today ranking every offensive lineman in the 2024 draft class, at least everyone that I've watched. At this point, I've graded 65 offensive linemen, and there are still a few that I need to get to, but I'm trying to get these videos out with some breathing room before the draft. I thought about doing a separate video for each position, but since I have a lot of positional changes with offensive line, it just made sense to group them all into one video. There's a lot of players that I might have as a guard, but they could theoretically play guard or tackle. So we're just going to rank all the offensive linemen in one list, and then at the end of the video, I'll stack them by position. And since we have 65 players to get to, for these later rounds, I'm just going to reveal them all at once, and then we'll start to go one by one once we get higher up the board. So these are my undrafted and priority free agent grades. These are players that were either bad in college or decent in college, but bad athletes. Doug Nestor, McCade Mettauer, Andrew Coker, I feel like were liabilities on their college teams. As a peek behind the curtain, I have like 50 to 80 key plays saved for each of these players on my huddle, and before I talk about them, I go through their plays really quickly just so it's fresh on my mind. And when I was recording the edge rusher video for the 6th and 7th round type of players, I kept coming across guys where their only good plays were against Andrew Coker. Carson Barnhart played about every position besides center for Michigan. I don't think he played either of them particularly well. Will Putnam and Justin Diedick are center prospects that actually had decent tape, but just very limited athletically. Michael Juergens out of Wake Forest, I was actually really impressed with his run blocking. He's just lacking in play strength. He played left guard this past season, but he was a center for most of his career, and I could see that being his long-term position in the NFL. Keaton Bills out of Utah is kind of a powerful phone booth type of player, but very stiff moving laterally. I wasn't that impressed with his tape. Gottlieb Ayidzi, who I'm probably pronouncing wrong, actually has some really impressive movement skills. He's fluid out in open space. He played mainly right tackle for Maryland. He'd slide into right guard if somebody got injured, but he's got relatively short arms. For as fluid as he is, he gave up the corner way too often. I don't trust him at tackle in the NFL, but he's really lacking in play strength. He got walked back by power pretty consistently and wasn't able to create much movement in the run game. So I'm not sure there's a position he really fits, because he definitely needs to add play strength to hold up at guard. And then my final priority free agent is Frank Crum out of Wyoming. He was one of the stars of the combine based on his athletic testing and also his hair. At over 6'8", he had a 96th percentile 10-yard split, ran a 4.94 in the 40-yard dash. You definitely see the athleticism as a run blocker, especially getting to the second level. He had some pretty dominant blocks on linebackers, but the pass pro technique is just so all over the place. Habitual oversetter, leans into blocks constantly, and just doesn't play with balanced footwork. The 7th round grades are going to start off with Jeremy Flax, who's a right tackle out of Kentucky, 343 pounds, which is 96th percentile for offensive tackles, but as you would expect, his other athletic testing was pretty awful. At the college level, he was a decent player, but the lack of foot speed and agility, I think, really limits his potential at tackle. He loses to speed rushes, doesn't really have inside recovery ability, and for a bigger player, he was decent in the run game, but nothing special. Ethan Driscoll is a massive left tackle out of Marshall, over 6'8", over 35-inch arms. He has decent movement skills for a player of his size, but I don't think it's up to NFL standards. I feel like he's going to struggle with NFL speed rushers, and you can really see him overcompensating for that lack of pocket range. He gives a ton of space into the B gap. He also has a really top-heavy build. I could see him struggling with speed to power. He has some crafty hand usage, but I wouldn't take him earlier than the back end of day 3. We got Charles Turner, who's a center out of LSU. He was a Senior Bowl invite. He's got extremely long arms, but pretty undersized when it comes to his other measurables. He really struggles to sustain blocks in the run game, falls off of blocks constantly. On down blocks and back blocks, he gets driven backwards. He's upright, lets people into his frame, and he really struggles to move his feet in pass pro. Center Nick Gargiulo out of South Carolina had a really good combine performance. 6'5", 318, long arms. He ran a 7.333 cone, which is 91st percentile. I thought he had pretty average tape. He struggled at times with balance and would be late to pick up stunts, which seemed to be a common theme with South Carolina's offensive line, but he's got decent power in the run game. He can get out in space, block linebackers at the second second level. He has some good hand technique in pass pro and also has guard versatility as well. Willis Patrick out of TCU is kind of an interesting player. He's built like a cube. He has really strong hands and he's got some technical nuance with his punch, but he's just so limited as far as moving his feet in pass protection. He ran at 8.63 in the 3-cone, which is the worst time of any player in this class, so definitely limited to a gap scheme. We got Aneem Dankwa out of Howard, who's just a giant. He looks especially big on Howard's tape based on the level of competition they were playing. Almost 6'8", 353 pounds, over 35-inch arms. He's got a freakish build, but very clumsy in open space. I don't trust him in pass protection at this point. He struggles to get proper depth in his kick slide, lacks the recovery skills to mirror counters. He was getting worked by like Florida A&M's edge rushers. He's purely a draft and stash project to me. Oklahoma center Andrew Rame is big and somewhat powerful, but struggles to move side to side. Crossface moves give him major issues. He has a good anchor. He had some nice down blocks, but even there, his hand usage really limits his effectiveness in the power run game. We got another center, Drake Nugent out of Michigan. He's very undersized, and even at 298 pounds, he's not an elite athlete. He is a very effective zone blocker. He's got good timing getting to the second level, but he absolutely cannot get drafted to a gap scheme. On a back block or down block, he's getting moved back into his gap routinely. You'd expect him to struggle with bull rushes, but he actually has really good technique, hop stepping and setting his anchor, and where he actually struggles in pass protection is with quickness off the snap. Michael Hall out of Ohio State was giving him major issues. So Drake Nugent is more of a fringe roster type of guy to me. KT Leviston played left tackle for Kansas State. He has the length that you look for at tackle, but I actually project him to move to guard. He has a really hard time mirroring a two-way go. He gets beat around the corner. He gets beat inside. He's actually kind of explosive getting out in space. He's got some mauling run blocks at the second level, and against power rushes, he's got the natural anchor and play strength, but he's consistently late with his hands and he lets pass rushers into his frame, so that kind of limits his effectiveness against bull rushes. Tylen Grable is a left tackle for Central Florida. He was one of the best testers at the combine. 98th percentile vertical jump, 88th percentile 40-yard dash. He's definitely a good athlete. I didn't think that elite athleticism showed up on tape, but he can get downfield quickly on screens or as a puller. He has decent recovery skills, but unfortunately he has to use those very frequently. He'll lose the corner to speed rushes, he'll overset and get beat inside. He doesn't really play with a consistent balanced base, so he will get launched by power, and his arm length is right under the threshold that you look for tackles. Nick Somick out of Michigan State I think is injured, so we're not going to get testing for him. He's big, he's got a solid anchor, he's a powerful run blocker. His run blocking tape was really impressive in every phase. He can move people off the line of scrimmage, he can get out on the move as a puller, good target location out in open space. His biggest issue is just foot speed and pass protection. He struggles with speed rushers. He'll let pass rushers get the edge on him, doesn't really slide his feet and stay in front of crossface moves. Next up is guard Trevor Keegan out of Michigan. He has refined hand usage, I would say above average play strength. You don't see him lose to power that often. He's a very smart and aware player, always looking for work, and he's got the movement skills to be a puller or climb to the second level. He is kind of stiff moving laterally, and he's 6'5", so he really struggles with pad level. His upright build will give him issues, especially in the run game. And then final 7th round grade is Illinois left tackle Julian Pearl. He had some buzz heading into the year as potentially a mid-round draft pick, but his tape is way too inconsistent. He has kind of the prototypical size with really long arms, and he's got some dominant run blocks on tape. He can throw people around, but his pass protection technique at this point I think makes him unplayable. He has a terrible habit of striking with the inside hand and overextending as much as I've ever seen a player overextend. Like, he will just lunge with the inside hand at the beginning of the play and give edge rushers a clear runway around the corner. Ladarius Henderson out of Michigan played left tackle in 2023. He's a transfer from Arizona State where he played left guard. I think guard is definitely his long-term position in the NFL. He does have elite arm length, 35 inches, but he really struggles to cover all that space on the outside. Clunky lateral movement skills. When he's trying to block a speed rush, he carries his weight way too far outside and gives a wide open B gap. He has okay straight line athleticism. I think he's got some potential in a gap scheme, but he doesn't really use his length and strike with much force into contact. So I think he's a project guard for a gap scheme offense. Caden Wallace was a right tackle for Penn State, over 2,200 snaps at right tackle for his career. I've got him as a tackle on my board. I would definitely try him there first, but if I had to guess, I think his best position in the NFL is guard. He has enough length, but he's just built more like a guard with kind of a stocky, dense build. He can drive people back in the run game. He's pretty reliable against power. He's got a good snatch trap technique, but another player that has a hard time getting enough depth against speed rushers and lacks the recovery skills to mirror inside counters. And he doesn't really have precise hand usage at this point. He's kind of disjointed with his punch. We've got Javian Cohen, a guard out of Miami, transfer from Alabama. He's built like a starting NFL guard. I think he's just lacking the movement skills that you look for. He has good awareness and pass protection for stunts and twists. His length gives him a lot of margin for error as far as establishing first contact, and at his size, he has a pretty consistent anchor against power, but he's lacking the slide quickness and recovery skills, and I didn't feel like he really used his length to be as dominant as he could be in the power run game. He's kind of tentative into initial contact, doesn't strike with a whole lot of force. He definitely has some developmental traits, but the tape this year was pretty underwhelming. Next up, we've got Satoa Lamea, who is a right tackle for Utah, definitely going to be a guard in the NFL. He has some of the most dominant run blocking tape in this class, not on a consistent basis, looking at a season holistically, but in flashes, what he can do in the run game stacks up with someone like Talise Fuaga. He's just a road grader that can absolutely flatten people at the point of attack, and it's not even like he has this elite size or athletic traits. He just gets underneath people's pads, drives his legs, plants them in the ground, and then he also has the fluid hips to win playside angles as a zone blocker, but he definitely has a one-track mindset and really struggles to deal with inside movement as a run blocker. If they're running to the right and his initial step is towards the play side and the defensive end cuts inside to the left, he's just so late to react to that slant. If you were playing Utah and you just wanted to rack up TFLs, just go in the opposite direction of wherever he moves off the snap. And then the pass protection was a complete mess. He's got short arms. He struggles to gain enough depth against speed rushers. That's the easiest way to get moved to guard in the NFL. He's slow to react when edge rushers dip underneath his outside hand, and when he does make contact, he doesn't have the grip strength to hold rushers in place. His outside hand is easily chopped or swiped. He gets beat by inside counters a few times per game, and there's a lot of examples where he'll lose early in the play and then he'll just completely give up and not even make an effort to recover. Another Miami offensive lineman, center Matt Lee. He's an undersized but technically sound player with good movement skills. He has really quick, accurate hands in pass pro. Despite his size, he did a pretty good job anchoring against power rushers. I do think that's an area he could struggle with in the NFL at 301 pounds. The primary phase where you see his size being an issue is trying to move people off the line of scrimmage. He just gets no displacement against nose tackles. Miami used him like he was Jason Kelsey. They had him leaking out on screens like 5 times per game. And again, he's a solid athlete, 85th percentile 40-yard dash. He's explosive off the snap. He can get out in space, but he's like whatever the opposite of a heat-seeking missile is. He just kind of picks his landmarks and then sprints to that spot. Every play they send him out on a screen, he looks good to start out. I'm thinking this is finally going to be the play where he makes contact and puts someone on the ground, but he just completely whiffs, doesn't even get close to a defender. He's a relatively young player, and with his technical polish, I think he could find work as a fringe starter, but I think the size limitations might keep him from being a top half of the league type of player. All right, we're now into the top 200. We've got South Dakota State left tackle Garrett Greenfield. He was an above average left tackle at the FCS level. When you've got someone playing against such a low level of competition, you want to see them dominate, and he didn't really do that. In pass pro, he has good technique. He knows what he's doing with his hands. He's got an effective snatch trap. He can play with independent hands. He's balanced and controlled getting into his kick slides, but he has a major problem of stopping his feet when he lands his punch. He'll throw his hands and then just plant his feet in the ground, and if pass rushers can beat the outside hand, he's not quick enough to recover to the outside. I didn't see him lose much to power in college, but he's got kind of a top-heavy build with short arms. That's not the ideal size profile for a good anchor in the NFL. And then he was a below average run blocker. He had the best vertical jump ever for an offensive tackle at the combine, 38.5 inches. And on tape, he's a solid athlete, but you don't really see that explosiveness getting out in open space. And on base blocks, he just gets dominated at the point of attack. The Northern Iowa game, he got push-pulled by the front side in man like 3 times. I've got Layden Robinson out of Texas A&M as my 15th ranked guard. He has the ideal frame for a guard, 34.5-inch arms. He weighed in at 302 pounds. He definitely looked a lot bigger than that on tape. He was listed at 315 at Texas A&M. I'm guessing it's a situation where he dropped weight to try to run a better time or something. With Layden Robinson, there are like 3 reps a game where it all comes together and he looks like a starting NFL guard. He has potential to be an elite drive blocker. He can just uproot defenders, displace them 5+ yards off the line of scrimmage. I think he's a smart and alert pass blocker. He's got a stiff 2-hand punch, really consistent grip strength, and when he's squared and centered to a power rush, he has a really solid anchor. His biggest problem in pass pro is footwork. He just doesn't really have the slide quickness to mirror pass rushers across 2 gaps. He'll also get beat by bull rushes more than he should by setting his anchor at kind of a crooked angle, and he's not actually getting walked back into the pocket. He's just giving kind of a soft edge for them to work the corner. If you can fix some technical issues, I think Layden Robinson could be a starting guard in a gap scheme. I don't really think he has the movement skills for wide zone, and I worry about his foot speed in pass pro. And then final 6th round grade is Hunter Norzad out of Penn State. He would be one of the biggest centers in the NFL. He's got the dream build for a center. He's kind of short, but he's 317 pounds, long arms, massive hands. His anchor is just impenetrable. College nose tackles trying to bull rush him, it's like running into the walls of an asylum padded room. He's got really good technique dropping his anchor, doesn't allow any displacement into the pocket. He's got really good hand usage and pass protection. He clamps face-up rushers. If you were limited to just a 4x4 tile of the field, he would be pretty much shut down in pass pro, but he's the definition of a phone booth offensive lineman. He just can't slide his feet. If you rush through either of the A gaps, it's like he's moving in quicksand. And he's one of, if not the worst offensive lineman in this class at identifying stunts. Every game that I watched, he was late to react to at least a couple stunts. The Ohio State game was terrible. They were just attacking him with it. Moving on to the 5th round grades, we've got Florida center Kingsley Eguakon, who's probably the most boom bust center in this class. I'm a lot higher on him than most people, but I do understand being risk averse when it comes to the center position. He has the ideal size and frame for a center. He put up great numbers at Florida's Pro Day. He only played 4 games in 2023, so you got to go back and watch some tape from the previous year. And he just has an all or nothing play style in both phases. In the run game, he's either mauling people off the line of scrimmage or overextending and missing a block. In pass pro, he's got a devastating snatch trap, forceful jump set. His punch is extremely powerful, just stabs his hands into the pass rusher's frame, but there's so much forward lean and overextension where if he misses with his hands, he gives rushers a clear path to the quarterback. He's also been called for 31 penalties in the last 3 seasons. So if you've got a good offensive line coach that can kind of reel in his technique and get him to play a little bit more under control, I think he could be a top 5 center in the NFL, but he's also someone where it wouldn't surprise me if he was out of the league after a couple years. Trente Jones out of Michigan is another player that I seem to be a lot higher on than most people. He wasn't even a full-time starter for Michigan. He was their 6th offensive lineman. He played 395 snaps last year. Most of those were at right tackle, coming in if someone got injured. I think he's going to be a guard in the NFL, but I really like him as a high upside developmental prospect. He's explosive moving in open space. In his pass sets, you see the slide quickness to mirror rushers up and down the arc. He's got good recovery skills. He can drive his legs and create displacement on down blocks. He needs to add some weight, and I think he's got a ways to go with his hand placement. He'll catch bull rushes with open arms, and I don't think his initial punch has that much striking power. But if you add like 10 pounds and get him a little bit more coordinated with his hands, I think he can be a starting guard in the NFL. Next up, I've got Wisconsin center Tanner Bortolini. He was one of the best testers at the combine. He ran the fastest 10-yard split ever for a center. He had a 4.28 shuttle and a 7.16 3-cone. Those are both 97th percentile, and you see see that translate to slide quickness on tape. He can stay connected to pass rushers and just mirror them across the entire line of scrimmage, it seems like. He has extremely short arms, even for a center. He kind of negates some of that length disadvantage with really precise hand usage. He's also really good at reloading his punch throughout the rep to defeat counter moves. He does some nice things in the zone running game, but I think he is limited to a zone scheme. He gets moved backwards at the point of attack, rarely creates any displacement, and he's really just lacking the size and play strength to hold up on down blocks. And then at the Senior Bowl, he was completely overwhelmed. He looked like one of the worst offensive linemen there. Next, I've got Oklahoma left tackle Walter Roos. He allowed the lowest pressure rate of any FBS tackle in 2023. He has a well-built frame, over 35-inch arms. He has good awareness in pass pro when it comes to stunts and twists. He had one of the best individual plays of any tackle in this class. It was the game-winning touchdown against Texas. He blocked 2 defenders at once to give the quarterback enough time. He just isn't a very fluid athlete. I feel like in the NFL, he's going to struggle with true speed around the edge, and his hand placement still needs a lot of work. He doesn't get his hands inside consistently, and his initial punch doesn't have a lot of knockback power. Michigan guard Zach Zinter had a season-ending broken fibula and tibia versus Ohio State, so we didn't get any combine testing for him, but he's 6'5", 309 pounds, good arm length. He has above average play strength. You see that in the run game and as a pass protector. He's able to drive stationary targets off the line of scrimmage. He's got a pretty reliable anchor. I think he's one of the best pullers in this class. He does a great job adjusting in open space and finishes his targets into the ground as consistently as anyone, but very upright pad level. Even though he has the play strength, he struggles to create leverage in the run game, and he has a lot of issues moving laterally in pass pro. Also tends to be late to identify stunts. The last 5th round grade is Brandon Coleman, who is a very difficult evaluation. He played mostly left tackle at TCU. He did play left guard for the first 4 games of the season, and he has the highest athletic score of any offensive lineman in this class. He had a 74th percentile short shuttle. Every other movement drill was at least 86th percentile. He has long arms, big hands, and his tape was a lot more impressive in 2022 than it was last year. He really struggled last year in pretty much every phase. Brandon Thorne said he was dealing with a lower calf injury that lingered throughout the season, and that could be an explanation for why his level of play dropped off. But last year, he was really just lacking body control and balance. He had a difficult time with speed rushes, inside counters. They didn't try power on him that frequently. He seems to have a solid anchor, but he also has a lot to clean up as far as hand usage. We'll get into some other players with this same issue, but he's an outside hand striker in pass pro. So at the top of his set, he's throwing the outside hand, and in college, there's a lot of times that he's able to land that punch and end the rep immediately. But against better pass rushers, if they swipe down that outside hand, you've got to have the recovery speed to be able to get depth and protect the corner, and he just wasn't able to retreat and get enough depth. It was the cause of the majority of his losses. He also leads with his hands in the run game and really overextends. He's pretty easy to defeat at the second level. There are times where it all comes together for him, but I just can't take him any earlier than the 5th round as a bet on the traits and the upside. We're now into the 4th round grades. I've got Isaiah Adams out of Illinois, who played guard and tackle. I think he'll definitely be a guard in the NFL. He's pretty much a completely different player if he's playing left guard or right tackle. At tackle, you can tell that he's very conscious of the fact that he's kind of a limited athlete to be playing on the outside, so he's extremely patient with his hands, and a lot of times that works for him. He does a good job of not overextending, but he still has some vulnerabilities at the top of the rush, and because he's playing so patient, he's letting pass rushers establish first contact. So even though he has good size, if they go speed to power, they're able to get into his frame and walk him back into the pocket, and then he just doesn't have the reactive athleticism to slide with inside spins. That was the result of a lot of his losses on top of speed to power. But then at guard, his tape is a lot better. He does a great job of locking his hands inside, staying connected for the entire rep. You'd expect him to have more issues with power on the inside, but he actually had a really strong anchor when he was being proactive with his punch. As long as he doesn't have to take deep pass sets, he can hold up against power rushers pretty effectively. And then he's a really good run blocker. He does a great job running his feet through contact. He's a violent finisher. He's got some outstanding backside cutoffs on tape, either reach blocking and torquing a defender into the ground. He also does a great job with cut blocks. So I really like Isaiah Adams at guard. Most of my negatives for him exclusively show up when he's playing tackle. Next up is Javon Foster, left tackle for Missouri. He's got good good size, over 2,700 career snaps at left tackle. He's an excellent zone blocker. Missouri runs so much outside zone, and he's got the hip fluidity to secure difficult reach blocks. He has good power in the run game, some nice cut blocks on the backside of wide zone. My concerns with Javon Foster are in pass protection. He's very reliant on the two-hand strike, which is a pretty boom-bust way of pass blocking at tackle. He doesn't have great pocket range. He's kind of stiff if he has to mirror a two-way go, and I'd like him to tighten up his hand placement a little bit. If he's going to stick with a two-hand punch, he needs to work on not being so wide into initial contact. Maryland left tackle Delmar Glaze, I'm projecting to move inside to guard. You could try him at tackle, but I think there are some limitations on the outside. The majority of his pass blocking tape is really solid. He had a shutdown performance against Ohio State. He's another two-hand punch offensive tackle. I think compared to Javon Foster, he does a much better job timing up his punch. He's really good at syncing his initial strike with the downswing of the rusher's move. So if they're using a speed chop, he's landing his punch inside so that they just miss his hands. He has a rock solid anchor, consistent grip strength, does a good job of resetting his punch throughout the rep, and when he's in position, he's got a firm inside hand to catch spin moves and counters. But there were a couple games on his tape where his pocket range and recovery skills were really exposed. Penn State and Michigan, they were beating him around the edge. They were beating him with inside counters. I just don't think he really has the movement skills to hold up on the outside in the NFL. But if you move him into guard, I think he can be a high quality pass protector. He doesn't have a lot of negative plays in the run game, but I don't think he adds a whole lot as a run blocker. He doesn't really finish blocks. I don't think he projects as a great zone blocker, and he has decent power, but not a mauler by any means. We got Arkansas center Bo Limmer. He is an undersized zone center, really impressive athletic testing, 99th percentile vertical jump. He had 39 reps in the bench press, which doesn't mean a whole lot, but it's still impressive. And you see that explosiveness and fluidity show up in the run game. He's a very skilled zone blocker. He's got the bend to secure reach blocks. He's controlled climbing to the second level. I don't really think his athletic traits translated to pass pro. He actually struggled with crossface moves a lot more than you would expect. I think it probably has more to do with being late to react than being unable to move his feet, but you'd like him to be a little bit quicker moving laterally in pass pro, and his size also holds him back some in the run game. He can finish blocks when he's out in space, but he struggles to create much movement off the line of scrimmage. He was actually a lot more effective against bull rushes than you would expect. He has good technique, flexible lower half dropping his anchor, and he does a good job staying centered to bull rushes, keeping his hands inside. You do see that initial surge off the snap move him back a little bit, and I think in the NFL that could be something he struggles with more. The other thing I had with Bo Limmer is that he trips and falls down pretty often. Now, if that happens occasionally, you get tripped up on your own offensive lineman and fall down, that's not a big deal, but it's happening like 4 to 5 times a game, which I think speaks to sloppy footwork and below average balance. Next up is Cedric Van Pran out of Georgia, who's my third ranked center. He's another player that I think dropped some weight to run a better 40 time. He was listed at 310 pounds on Georgia's website, weighed in at 298. Sometimes teams lie, but that really has more to do with height. And when you watch him on tape, he has a really good anchor and he's just a mauler in the run game. I don't have access to this kind of statistic or anything, but I would guess he led centers in this class in knockdowns per game. He's a violent block finisher, whether it's at the line of scrimmage, out at the second level. He also has really good hand usage in pass pro. That initial punch can end the rep immediately. He does a good job getting his hands inside. He flashed some independent hand usage. He can mix up his sets. You'll see him use jump sets occasionally. It seemed like he had much longer arms on tape. I had to edit his scouting report because there were multiple times I talked about his length, and he ended up having 31 and 3/8 inch arms, which is 5th percentile. But that really just speaks to his hand usage and how proactive he is with his punch. But his biggest issue, again, comes back to slide quickness, mirroring crossface moves. If he oversets or takes a false step, he just doesn't have the recovery skills to get back in position. And he is a mauler at the second level, but if his target changes position, you see how stiff he is in open space. He can't really reset and recover his angle. We are now into the top 100, and that's going to start with my 95th ranked player, 11th ranked tackle, Christian Jones out of Texas. He has a ton of experience, over 3,200 career snaps, which is the most of any offensive tackle in this class. Most of those came at right tackle, which is what he played in his final year. He has size, length, power. He can displace defensive linemen on down blocks. He finishes blocks in the run game. He's got a reliable anchor starter. You can also see on tape how much experience he has. He has patient hand usage and pass protection, very quick reaction time to stunts and blitzes. He's also alert sliding with inside counters, but that's where you see some of his limitations. He struggles with short area bursts and foot speed, whether it's an inside counter, a run blitz, a second level target that's changing his angle. He just doesn't have the change of direction skills and fluidity in open space that you look for, but I think he could be a quality starter in a gap heavy scheme like New England, for example. And then another gap scheme player is Boston College guard Christian Mahogany. He has a wide frame, ideal size for a guard, absolutely violent run blocker. He had this rep against Virginia where it was just a simple down block and he moved the nose tackle 13 yards off the line of scrimmage. He has pretty good straight line explosiveness. He can get downfield as a puller, but he is lacking in zone blocking range. He had some issues with backside cutoffs and reach blocks. He's capable of playing with heavy hands and striking aggressively. I felt like there were times that he was kind of soft with his initial punch and he'd give rushers early control, and he has difficulties mirroring quick movements across gaps in pass protection and as a run blocker. Boston College also ran a very run, play action heavy scheme, kind of like the Atlanta Falcons, so there weren't a whole lot of true pass sets on his tape, but he looked great at the Shrine Bowl. Notre Dame right tackle Blake Fisher is my 10th ranked tackle. He has good length and a really nuanced pass blocking strategy. He's got a variety of different sets and punches to keep pass rushers off balance. He has a really nice bait technique where he'll flash and withdraw his outside hand to get the pass rusher into his move and then establish contact. He uses a jump set pretty often. He's got good knockback pop on his initial punch, but his biggest issue is pocket range. A lot of his losses come on jump sets. If he's really aggressive getting into the pass rusher's frame and they're able to get around the edge, he doesn't have the recovery range to protect the corner. And even just on straight up speed rushes, you can see he has to open his hips prematurely. He has the play strength and flexibility, I think, to have a good anchor, but he will lose to power when he isn't playing with a consistent base. There's a lot of times that he'll have staggered footwork when he's anchoring, and he just doesn't have square footwork against that bull rush, and he will get folded back into the pocket. He has some nuanced hand usage, but overall it still needs to be refined. There are times that he'll strike at the face mask. He also has a tendency to expose his outside hand too much and get swiped around the corner, and there are also times that he'll overset and react late to inside counters. He has some dominant finishes in the run game. If he can just line up his target, he will flatten people at the second level, but he takes inconsistent angles to second level targets, and it's a similar story when it comes to down blocks at the point of attack. He has the play strength and leg drive to create displacement, but his pad level is pretty high, so if he's got to engage with somebody one-on-one, he has a difficult time creating leverage. I've got a 3rd round grade on South Dakota State guard Mason McCormick. He was another elite tester at the combine. He's got a thick frame, long arms. He had a 99th percentile vertical jump, 97th percentile short shuttle and broad jump, but the athletic testing I don't think quite showed up on tape. I thought his recovery skills were just average. You will see him lose the edge in pass protection a couple times per game, which is kind of concerning for a player in the FCS. I think part of that's coachable. He has some issues with synchronizing his feet and his hands. He'll lean into engagement and not really bring his feet with him. His actual hand usage in pass pro is really impressive though. He's a nasty run blocker. He can torque defensive tackles off the line of scrimmage. He does show the level of dominance that you want to see for an FCS player in the run game. I think one-on-one at the point of attack, he could improve his hand placement and engage with a more focused initial strike, but he clears out rushing lanes. He mauls people at the second level. Definitely a fun player in that phase. He also, I think, has some center versatility, which he showed at the Shrine Bowl, where he was one of the best performers there. And I have a 3rd round grade, but with his athletic profile, I could see him going in the 2nd round for sure. We got Houston left tackle Patrick Paul, just an enormous frame, 6'7", 331, over 36-inch arms, and at that size, he actually has really good movement skills. Not elite, but he can slide around the pocket. He's got decent recovery range. His size and movement skills alone was enough for him to be pretty much a shutdown pass protector at the college level. He would go entire games not allowing a single pressure because the pass rushers he was facing were just trying to run around him, and he's too big and too fluid to just outrun. But his main issue is hand usage, which is a frequent problem for players with such long arms. He's habitually late and wide with his punch. He gives pass rushers easy access to his frame. It showed up occasionally on his college tape, but it was a lot more pronounced at the Senior Bowl. He was just bear hugging speed to power, and even though he is big, it's still a top heavy build. So in the NFL, the better power rushers are going to be able to walk him back in the pocket. So the hand usage and strike timing in pass pro still needs some major development. I also don't think he projects as a great run blocker. He doesn't really play with much edge or look to finish blocks. He has the size and movement skills, I think, to fit into any scheme. He just hasn't put out very good run blocking tape so far. Kansas State guard Cooper Beebe is built like a tree stump. He's 6'3", 322 pounds, low to the ground with extremely short arms. He played mostly left guard the last 2 years, but he's also got experience at left and right tackle, and he's the definition of a mauler at the second level. So much hand pop on initial contact. His tape is just comical the way that he sends linebackers flying. He has really crafty hand usage and good technique in pass pro. He plays with consistent posture. He's a doorstop against bull rushes. Despite his long arms, he's able to get his hands inside and neutralize a lot of cross-face moves, and he tested really well, but on tape I felt like he was kind of a plotter. He doesn't have elite recovery range moving laterally, and he's not a very fluid zone blocker. I think he's definitely best fit for a gap scheme. Reach blocks were the main area that I saw him struggle on tape, and he's never played center, but if he can snap, I think that's probably the best position for him in the NFL. And my second ranked center is Zach Frazier out of West Virginia, another very experienced player with over 3,200 career snaps. He's extremely intelligent and aware. He makes all the mic IDs, does a great job deciphering stunts, very good zone blocker. He can torque defensive linemen on backside cutoffs, make some highlight blocks at the second level. For the most part, at the college level, he had very good hand usage and pass protection. He's got a quick and firm punch, consistently gets his hands inside. He's able to use his hands independently and keep his feet moving, but he has pretty short arms, and there's a lot of times where defenders are able to establish first contact and lock him out. He also has good technique and footwork against power rushes, but his anchor kind of dissipates as the play progresses. I think in the NFL that could be something he struggles with a little bit, and I thought his tape was just a lot more impressive early in the season. Watching his games one by one, I started off with a lot higher grade and eventually lowered that to a third round grade as I finished the season. The final third round grade is Dominic Pooney out of Kansas. He played left tackle for Kansas, but I actually think he has 5-position versatility. The arm length might be a concern at tackle, but he has the recovery range and slide quickness to mirror pass rushers effortlessly. At the Senior Bowl, he was lining up at tackle, guard, and center and won pretty much every rep in the one-on-ones. He's got power in the run game. He can cave in his side of the line of scrimmage. He's a technician with his hands. He's got a heavy initial strike, flexible refitting his hands throughout the play. The length concerns do show up against power. He'll let long arms into his frame, but for the most part, he has a really solid anchor. And then he also has one of the best jump sets in this class. He can be aggressive with his set and then recover backwards and get depth. I think there are times at tackle where he gets to the top of the rush and he's kind of got a soft inside hand because he's leaning his weight too far to the outside. And Kansas kind of ran the triple option, so there weren't a whole lot of translatable pass blocking reps. But outside of that, it's really clean tape, and I'm a lot higher on Dominic Pooney than the consensus. We're now on to the second round grades, and that's going to start with my 8th ranked tackle, Kingsley Suamataia. Kingsley has outstanding size. He's kind of built like a guard, but he has the length to play tackle for sure. He has really good straight line athleticism for a player of his size. Based on what was reported from Feldman's Freaks List and just the way people had talked about him, I was actually a little disappointed with his athleticism. I didn't really see like a freak athlete on tape, but this tier of tackles is really the players where if you draft them, I immediately look up who your offensive line coach is. I think Kingsley has some flashes of nuanced hand usage, but overall it's very unrefined. He's not very firm or impactful with his initial strike. He has a rock solid anchor, I think adequate pocket range, but he has major issues with inside counters, delayed recovery, extremely soft inside hand. He gets completely lost against stunts and blitzes. There are so many missed assignments really in both phases on his tape. And then the run blocking was a major disappointment. He needs to completely rework his technique as a zone blocker. At the second level, he has the explosiveness to get downfield quickly, but there's a lot of times that he's completely unsure of his assignment and he'll end up blocking no one. He leans and overextends into down blocks. The Oklahoma game was really good, but outside of that, his run blocking tape was a major disappointment. My 7th ranked tackle is Kieran Amagaji out of Yale. He played left tackle in college. He's got his pro day coming up in a couple days, so we don't have athletic testing for him right now, but he's 6'5", 323, over 36-inch arms, arms, outstanding size profile. He's a very difficult evaluation because he played such a weak level of competition. Even compared to the South Dakota State guys, the teams on their schedule were a lot better than, Cornell, Dartmouth. There was just no one on the edge that could even come close to replicating what he's going to face in the NFL. I think he did show patient hand usage, inside hand placement. He's got the slide quickness to mirror up and down the pocket. There were 1 or 2 times that his outside hand got swiped down, so maybe that gets exposed in the NFL. As a run blocker, he displaces people off the line of scrimmage, which is what you want to see for someone who plays for Yale, but I don't think he's a great fit for his zone scheme. He did have difficulties crossing the defender's face on reach blocks. And then my 6th ranked tackle is Washington right tackle Roger Rosengarten. This is another player that I'm a lot higher on than consensus. Mel Kiper has him at 28, which is too rich for me, but I think he should absolutely be a 2nd round pick. He has elite range and recovery skills, moves around the pocket like a tight end. Both of the Washington tackles use these really aggressive jump sets. They call it the 44 special. He'll basically just sprint out to a wide 9 and leave 6 to 7 yards of space in the B gap, and he's usually so firm and disruptive with that initial contact that he's able to end the rep early. But if they are able to get around the corner, he's got the recovery skills to get back into position. It is a very aggressive pass rushing strategy, so there are times that he'll get beat, and I don't think it's something he's going to be doing in the NFL, but it's great to see that reactive athleticism. But I think Rosengarten is just so crafty with his hands. He's got the elite movement skills. Not the best run blocker. He does his best work at the 2nd level, and he doesn't have ideal arm length. 33.5 inches is right on the border, but if he had longer arms, I'd probably consider having a 1st round grade on him. He had the worst game of his career in the championship game against Michigan. Watching the tape though, pretty much all of his bad plays were concentrated in the final 2 drives. I was going through the Michigan game and I get to the 4th quarter, there's been like 1 negative play for Rosengarten. The last 2 drives, he kind of fell apart. He got some bad penalty calls though, which I think makes it seem worse than it actually was. I think overall, you need to reel him in and get him to play with a little bit more control, but there's so much natural talent there and he's already pretty advanced from a technical standpoint. Next up is Arizona left tackle Jordan Morgan, who I have as a guard on my board. There are some potential tackle to guard converts in this class that I would try out at tackle in training camp. With Jordan Morgan though, I have a hard time seeing him play tackle in the NFL. He doesn't have ideal pocket range. He'll get beat around the outside. When he does protect the corner, he has to open his hips and lunge at the top of the rush. Because he's worried about getting beat to the outside, he's extremely vulnerable to inside counters, and then the play strength and anchor and pass protection I would say are below average. He had some pretty brutal losses to speed to power against Braylon Trice. He's a really good zone blocker. He's got the ability to swivel his hips and get play side leverage on reach blocks, and he has outstanding hand usage in pass protection. You saw that with his matchup against Leatu Latu. He was able to bait out that cross chop, get his hands inside quickly, and shut down his rush. I think he projects as a solid, technically sound guard. I think you've got to move him inside because of his limitations at tackle, but even with that move, I still have concerns because I don't feel great about moving someone that struggles with bull rushes into guard where they're going to be facing bigger pass rushers. Next up, we've got one of my guys in this class, Christian Haynes, guard out of UConn. He's 64th on the consensus board, but I've got him as a top 40 player. I think he's a day 1 high quality zone blocker. He reminds me of Nate Davis, Laken Tomlinson back when he was actually good. Also see some flashes of Kevin Dotson in his game, the way that he moves. He's got the lateral fluidity to win backside cutoffs. He takes great angles to the 2nd level, flattens people in open space. He plays through the whistle, has a mean streak, nasty finishing demeanor. He really has everything you look for from a zone blocker in terms of technique and movement skills, but he's no slouch in pass protection. He has really quick and nuanced hand usage. He can slide and mirror crossface moves. He's got the length to punch outside of his frame and separate himself from the pass rusher. What's keeping him out of the 1st round is that I don't think he has a rock solid anchor. You don't ever see dominant losses to power, but he will give some initial ground to power rushes, which I think will probably be his biggest issue in the NFL. My 5th ranked tackle is Tyler Guyton out of Oklahoma. He's a converted tight end that played right tackle. Out of anyone in this class, he's probably the person I would say looks like Tarzan, plays like Jane. The movement skills, frame, size, it's all built in a lab, exactly what you look for. He has long arms, densely packed frame, pretty much never loses to power. I have no concerns concerns about his ability to eat a bull rush, but his tape is honestly just not good. It's not necessarily bad, it's just way too sloppy. There's not a lot of highlight blocks. Oklahoma has kind of a gimmicky passing offense where there aren't that many true pass sets, but there's way too many times that he will overset, underset, let people go unobstructed in through the B gap. He does a good job of being patient and not overextending with his punch, but I would say he's too patient at times, and he doesn't really seem comfortable taking the fight to the pass rusher. He lets power rushers get into his frame. At the college level, he's got the play strength to just absorb that, but in the NFL, it's going to be a much bigger issue. And he also plays very upright. If you pause like a run 3 seconds into the play, you'll just see Tyler Guyton's head sticking out from the crowd. But what he does bring to the table is elite movement skills. For as unrefined as he is with his hands, he can just slide and mirror guys up and down the pocket effortlessly. On most plays, he didn't even need to do anything with his hands to protect the quarterback. But I think he has such a long way to go as a run blocker. There are very few knockdowns or even decisive wins on his tape. He doesn't play with much of an edge. He doesn't really ever finish blocks. He misses a lot of assignments at the second level or as a puller. He has good play strength, but again, the upright posture limits his ability to create any displacement off the line of scrimmage. So Guyton has all the physical traits. If he gets with a good offensive line coach and they teach him how to play the position, he has really an unlimited ceiling. But if you need a starting caliber tackle year one, I don't have much confidence that Tyler Guyton can be that. My top ranked center is Jackson Powers Johnson, and we are now into the top 32 on my overall big board. He's one of the biggest centers in combine history, 328 pounds, and at his size, he's actually got decent movement skills out in space. He's not the most fluid athlete, but he is explosive reaching his landmarks. In the run game, he's a mauler at every level of the field. He nukes linebackers as a puller. He can establish control of defensive linemen and just steer them out of gaps. He didn't have a lot of high difficulty one-on-one pass blocking assignments, but he only allowed one pressure in 2023. He's a little bit sloppy with his initial hand placement, but he does a good job resetting his hands if his punch is inaccurate. I don't think I ever saw him lose to power. At his size, I don't have any concerns about that projecting to the NFL, I guess, unless he's going up against Dexter Lawrence. And he was pretty clearly the best offensive lineman at the Senior Bowl. He was working at guard and center. He showed off the recovery skills. There were a couple times that he lost early in the rep, but he was able to slide over laterally and cut them off. I thought he had some inaccurate snaps, and there were also times at the second level where he was over aggressive, looking for the kill shot instead of just securing the block and taking the double. But outside of that, it's hard to find too many flaws in his tape. He's probably not the best fit for a zone-heavy scheme. I see him get mocked to the Steelers a lot with Arthur Smith. I don't think that's the best scheme fit. I see him as someone that has elite potential in a gap scheme and might be a little bit out of place if you're running a lot of outside zone. Next up, we've got Graham Barton out of Duke, and we're now into the true first-round grades. He played left tackle at Duke, but he started out his career at center. A lot of people are saying he has 5-position versatility. I think he's firmly an interior player. He has very short arms for an offensive tackle, and he will occasionally get beat around the edge. To me, that's just an automatic move inside if you have both of those issues. He had an elite pro day performance, 97th percentile 3-cone, 94th percentile 40-yard dash, and you see those movement skills show up in the run game. He's an outstanding zone blocker, but he can also really unlock the hips and drive people off the line of scrimmage. He had a rep against Jared Verse where he moved him back about 8 to 10 yards. He's patient and accurate with his hands. He does a good job synchronizing his hands and his feet, but his biggest issue in pass pro is that he will lose to power. In that same Florida State game, Jared Verse was able to knock him on his back with speed to power. It seems like the NFL might actually be a little bit higher on Graham Barton than I am. He's been getting some early first-round buzz following his pro day performance, and I just don't think the tape is really good enough to justify that. I think he's a solid late first round prospect, but someone that struggles with power, and then we're talking about moving them inside, that is a little bit concerning to me. And then a couple spots higher, I've got Talise Fuaga out of Oregon State. He played right tackle, but I think he's another very easy move inside. He has the best run blocking tape in this class by a healthy margin, and you see that show up in every aspect of run blocking. He's got the fluidity for reach blocks and outside zone. He ends people at the second level. He's got acceleration and closing burst as a puller. He has good drive power on down blocks. I think no matter the scheme, Fuaga projects as an elite run blocker. In pass protection, he has a really good anchor. He doesn't really have to use anchor footwork and hop step and everything because his natural play strength is just so much better than everyone else's. But I do think he has some limitations that will force a move inside. He has below average pocket range. He didn't have to take a ton of deep pass sets, but when he did, he really had to open up his hips to get to the top of the arc. He's kind of stiff sliding with inside counters, and then there's a technical issue that I've discussed a lot before that exacerbates his issues around the edge. He's another one of these players that's really aggressive throwing his outside hand, and at the college level, that initial strike was firm enough to end a lot of pass rushers' momentum, but in the NFL, when they can swipe that down and bend around the corner, I don't think he has the recovery quickness to get depth and protect the outside. Next up, we've got Washington tackle Troy Fautanu, who I have as a guard on my board, but out of all the guard tackle converts, I think he's the person that I have the most confidence could play tackle in the NFL. He has probably the best snatch trap technique that I've ever evaluated for a college offensive lineman. For those who don't know, a snatch trap is when a pass rusher is overextending with a long arm or bull rush and you just slap their hands down and release contact. He does that about as effective as anyone that I've ever seen. He's got long arms, he's quick out of his stance, and he's the player that I have raised my grade on throughout the process more so than anyone else in this class. On tape, he had a lot of issues getting beat inside. He didn't really seem to have the slide quickness to mirror inside counters. Inside spins against Troy Fautanu were pretty much automatic last year. He also gave a pretty soft corner to speed rushes and got walked back by power fairly consistently. So initially, I saw a player with real vulnerabilities in all three phases of pass blocking, but he had one of the best individual sessions that I've ever seen at the combine. He looked like he was playing a different position from everyone else on the field, and studying Washington's offense more in depth and learning about how they were purposefully oversetting and using these aggressive sets that I talked about with Roger Rosengarten, that alleviated some of my concerns with Troy Fautanu pass blocking in the NFL. I think if he starts taking more balanced sets, he'll be a lot less vulnerable to inside counters. And after the combine, I'm a lot more confident in his slide quickness and recovery ability. I still worry about his anchor. For as good as the snatch trap is, that's really his only way of defeating power rushes. If he has to sit down and drop his anchor, he's getting moved back into the pocket by Pac-12 edge rushers. And then his run blocking tape was really not good unless he was pulling or he was the second player on a combo block. He doesn't really have the power to move people against their will. He doesn't sustain blocks very well. He struggles to get play side leverage on reach blocks. I think he's got to add play strength, and that's one of the reasons that I think he might need to play tackle, because I don't know if he can move inside and deal with the bigger interior players. But the movement skills and technique in pass pro, which is what's most important, I think is definitely worth a first round pick. At OT4, I've got Amarius Mims out of Georgia, and I'll just say if we could turn injuries off, he would be my top ranked tackle. He has really unheard of size at almost 6'8", 340 pounds, over 36-inch arms, over 11-inch hands, and he still ran a 5.07 in the 40-yard dash, which is 74th percentile. His vertical jump was only 25.5 inches. Duke Manyweather, who trains him, actually said that he thinks that was a misrecording. He said when they were training, his vertical jump was like leagues higher than that, and you can see he doesn't really match up with his broad jump. But regardless, he's explosive, he's light on his feet, he's one of the least experienced players in this class with just 8 career starts, but he is by no means a project. It's more of just an uncertainty because the sample size of tape that we have for Amarius Mims is a lot smaller than the other guys, but he only allowed one pressure this past season. On tape, he looks like an experienced and polished offensive tackle. The one real knock that I have on him as a player is some slow reaction to inside counters. I do think it's a reaction time thing as opposed to an athletic limitation, because you see his slide quickness in other areas, but there are times on tape that he'll put up no resistance to an inside counter. But he's got pocket range, he's got finishing ability as a run blocker, he can anchor. There really aren't many holes in his game, he just struggles to stay healthy. healthy. My third ranked tackle is Olu Fashanu out of Penn State. He has elite pocket range and movement skills in pass protection. He fires out of his stance, gets depth effortlessly. I think his footwork in pass protection is the best thing that he has going for him. You see flashes of really high level hand usage and independent hands varying his punch timing, but he does have a tendency to be wide and late with his punch and let pass rushers get into his frame. The Ohio State game is the main thing that everybody brings up with Fashanu. He got walked back by power a few times. I honestly think that had more to do with his set depth than a lack of play strength. He is a little bit lighter at 312 pounds, but he's got outstanding anchor footwork and flexibility. My biggest issue overall with Olu Fashanu is the run blocking, which did improve in 2023, but it improved from below average to average. There were times where he finally started to play with an edge in the run game, but overall, I don't think he has great technique as a zone blocker. He doesn't do a very good job of bending and creating leverage on down blocks. There's obviously a chance he improves. I think he has the athleticism to be a good run blocker, but I really project him as a pass blocking specialist. My second ranked tackle is JC Latham out of Alabama. The first thing you notice with his tape is the raw power in both phases. He has one of the best anchors that I've ever seen for a college offensive lineman. Bull rushes end immediately, and he has elite grip strength to secure contact. And then in the run game, he drives people off the line of scrimmage, creates so much displacement. But what has him as a top 10 player for me is his advanced hand usage and his patience in pass protection. He has a really impressive combination of finesse and power as a pass blocker. He doesn't overextend. He knows based on the quarterback's drop where he's vulnerable, and he's got extremely long arms and can really just deconstruct rush moves. I think his lateral fluidity and pocket range are average. He can get enough depth against speed rushers, and he honestly had a pretty good success rate in college, but it always felt like he was just right on the edge of losing the corner. And then against inside counters, that's where you really will see him struggle. Now, throughout all of his tape, it was like 4 or 5 losses throughout the season, but I don't know if he's a player that can get depth and then redirect to the inside. So for that reason, I do think there's a chance he moves to guard. I view him absolutely as a player that you should start out at tackle, and then you know that you've got a fallback plan with a really high floor of moving him inside. The other negative for JC Latham is that he has 18 penalties over the last 2 seasons. Some of those were just him being too dominant at the point of attack, and they flagged him for giving someone the business, but there's also a good amount of false starts, which he definitely needs to clean up. And then my number 1 tackle is Joe Alt out of Notre Dame. His tape this past season was just rock solid in both phases. He's 6'8.5", 321 pounds, but he has the athleticism to stay in front of pass rushers consistently. He can get depth, recover to the inside, protect the corner. He can really just go back and forth and mirror guys, unlike most players of his size. He isn't very aggressive with his initial punch. He definitely has a patient play style in pass pro. A lot of people view that as a major negative. To me, like, there's a lot of guys in the NFL that play that way. I think it's much better to be patient with your hands than overextend and get yourself in trouble. As long as you're accurate with your hands when you do land your punch and you're comfortable resetting throughout the rep, I don't really think that's a major problem. His posture is pretty unconventional. For such a tall player, he kind of squats into contact. At the college level, that didn't give him any issues, but in the NFL, I could see him getting beat some by push-pull moves, and I don't know that he's going to have an elite anchor. I think having a top heavy build kind of limits you in that area. And listening to people talk about Joe Alt, I feel like people are underselling what he does in the run game. He can cave in his side of the line of scrimmage. He's got real power as a gap scheme run blocker. He's explosive enough to cover ground as a puller. He has outstanding hand usage at the second level to lock onto targets and stay connected throughout the entire play. And what's most impressive is his understanding of the running back's aiming point and his ability to clear defenders out of gaps and open up lanes. He knows exactly where the ball carrier's track is, and if someone starts leaning in one direction, he'll just kind of take them where they're going. I think being able to do that with everything developing behind you is so difficult. There's a couple times that he'll lean into a down block and get beat by a swim move, but overall there's very few negative plays in the run game. That's going to do it for the offensive linemen. These are the players that I haven't watched. Matt Goncalves out of Pittsburgh is the one player I definitely have to watch. The last 2 years, Pittsburgh has had these like 4th round tackle prospects prospects that missed their entire last season of college. And then the centers, Dylan McMahon and Jalen Sundell, I will probably get to eventually. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy the video, make sure to like and subscribe. Also, let me know in the comments any NFL draft prospects that you'd like me to cover. And if you want to see my full draft board as an interactive filterable table, I've got that up at A to Z sports.com. The link to that is in the description.